Hi, I'm David Manti, and welcome to a new episode of the Today in Manufacturing podcast. With me this week are Jeff Reinke and Anna Wells. We each have more than 15 years of experience covering the manufacturing industry. Every week, we take the 5 most popular stories on our websites and discuss the implications they have on the industry going forward. Before we get started, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. You could also help us out a lot by leaving the podcast a positive review on whatever platform you use. If you want to email the podcast, you can reach any of us at Jeff, David, or Anna at IEN.com with email the podcast in the subject line. You could also subscribe to our daily newsletter. Make sure you get it delivered to your inbox first. And subscribe to us on YouTube at IEN Magazine to get a notification so you can join us live every Thursday at 2 p.m. Jeff, how you doing this week?
I'm great, David. How about you?
I was doing great right up until about 5 minutes before we went live, and loyal listener Pete texted me and just said, no episode this week? And I'm like, no, Pete, we go live in 5 minutes. And he's like, no, I meant last week's episode. So apparently we never uploaded last week's episode to like Apple Podcasts and Google and everything.
What the what?
So for those lucky people out there that are getting a twofer, 157 and 158 back to back. But it has been uploaded for at least the last 3 minutes. Anna, how are you doing this week?
Last week's episode was so long, too. That is a lot of time with us. Apologies in advance.
It was under 90 minutes. It was 89.
Long.
It ran a little long.
It did. I apologize. My plane was struck by lightning. I'm sorry. I had to talk about it with my friends. All right. Before we jump into our first story this week, we have a word from our sponsor, Teledyne FLIR. Hi, I'm David Manti, and with me right now is Rob Milner with FLIR. Rob, does manufacturing have a leak problem?
David, it's been well established by very reputable agencies like the U.S. Department of Energy that as much as 25 or 30% of a manufacturing plant's total installed compressed air capacity is being lost to leaks right now.
That's a lot.
It is.
So let's talk about it. Join us for Acoustic Imaging for Manufacturing, how to capture cost savings through sound on February 27th at 11 a.m. Eastern. Rob's going to give us a little bit more on how we can fix this leak problem. Right, Rob?
You betcha.
And we're back. And as a result of the new sponsor, we actually had a really interesting comment come in from Colin, a loyal listener who's been listening to the podcast and helping us out a really long time. Colin says, I heard your comment about a guy who had a bearing sensor device, and it made him think about a subway mechanic back in New York in the 1970s. This mechanic installed a meat pop-out thermometer into the grease-fitting pipe tap. And so as he inspected the wheel bearings, if the meat thermometer was popped out, he knew the bearing was overheated and needed to be replaced. He also added great show. I felt like that was really necessary to add. But Colin, that kind of stuff is crazy. And while I love hearing those old stories as to how they used to do it, you know, the stuff from Teledyne FLIR in this upcoming live video podcast kind of looks at the cool technology that helps prevent that without, you know, life hacks, for lack of a better term. And also, before we jump into the first story, point of clarity, there was a bit of a semantics issue during the commercial break. Producer Alex would like to stress that the episode was uploaded, however, it was not pushed live, thus placing the blame on myself for taking Monday off. I apologize. Oversight on me entirely and no one else.
I feel like you didn't necessarily make that better.
I made it better for Alex.
Okay.
It's like a boiler. It's like a boiler room in here in like so many ways. It's 1,000 degrees and then this.
Our first story this week. John Deere's electric self-driving sprayer looks like a military vehicle. On February 13th, John Deere unveiled what is likely the world's first and only fully electric autonomous herbicide orchard sprayer. And it looked more like a military vehicle than a piece of farming equipment. Deere collaborated with the unmanned sprayer experts at Gus Automation to electrify the Gus. The sprayer includes a spot spraying weed detection system that only targets areas where chlorophyll is present, which could significantly reduce the overall application amount used. The batteries can handle a full spraying shift on a single full charge. The machine also uses GPS and LiDAR to allow one employee to operate and monitor a fleet of up to 8 Gus machines using a single laptop computer. The autonomous capabilities are backed by several safety features for avoiding hazards and pausing operations when people are nearby. Gary Thompson, Chief Operating Officer at Gus Automation, said the company has been asked countless times to make Gus electric. And Anna, it just makes sense.
Yeah. I don't know about you guys, but I think people of a certain age can only hear the word chlorophyll and think immediately chlorophyll more like borophyll.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
So chlorophyll more like borophyll. This is a cool development. I thought it looks like the Tesla Cybertruck of the ag community. It was like just a very intense looking vehicle, the Gus.
I would be interested to see what came first, because when I think like cyberpunk truck, this is exactly it. It's really cool looking.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe the Gus set the stage. That's where Elon Musk gets all of his ideas.
Yeah, secrets out, Musk.
Secrets out. So this has a lot of cool things going for it. Obviously, the electric component you mentioned. I think, one of the biggest conflicts between consumers and agricultural goals is how to grow crops while still adhering to this sort of increasing desire to not have your food blasted with pesticides. It's not good for workers. It's not good for the environment. People don't like it. But on the flip side, it keeps these crops hardy enough to grow amidst like bugs and pests and all that stuff. So how do you reconcile that? You make equipment that's smarter and more targeted. And it kind of it's exciting to see this application where it enables workers to be operating these remotely.
Yeah.
That seems like a big win. And I think I would add too that, we know that farm work is notoriously difficult to fill. It's hard. The pay isn't great. It's inflexible. It's on site. So I think this is an area where technology developments can really shine because, agriculture is not, and I don't want to be accused of being anti-jobs. I really don't. But
here we go.
I think the agriculture world is not necessarily a great area for job growth because we have not been able to fill those jobs for a long time.
Yeah.
And as our population continues to age, it's just very difficult work, And I just think those are areas that are ripe for automating, as are the order kiosks at McDonald's, as are, self-checkout. I saw a press release recently where Tennant, the floor scrubber company, is looking to launch a fully autonomous floor cleaner.
Okay.
These are the sweet spots.
Yeah.
So I think, there's a conversation that needs to be had around how you apply automation to applications where it is truly needed the most and taking humans out of roles where they don't want to be. And to me, this really does that. The technology is so exciting and cool, but also like it's very practical.
Yeah. You had at least 2 sweet spots. You had agriculture and cleaning the floors, but not the self-checkouts. But I mean, hey, that's a conversation.
Well, but that is a hard role to fill. That's my point.
Yeah. Oh,
so,
yeah.
I mean, I know people don't
staffing.
Yeah, yes. I know people don't love it, but if you cannot get anyone to do that job, it is, objectively better than the 15-person line of shopping carts.
Oh, true. The line of shopping carts or trying to do it all on your phone via their app, which is super intuitive. Jeff, I think we talk about it a lot when we talk about technology and agriculture, right? Is that a lot of these applications that are already being used are still thought of as futuristic to people. I mean, if you see the video of this thing going down every row in the orchard and not just sort of blanketing it, being pretty precise as to how it's applying the product, it's kind of incredible how this thing works.
No, I'd agree. And I would say, first of all, this looks way cooler than the Cybertruck.
Agreed. Yeah. It's like they were inspired by this and they're like, how could we make it worse? Well, they give it Windows.
Yeah, this is a really cool looking thing, which again, when we talk about getting people involved in agriculture, because there is, according to a couple different stats, I looked at 2.4 million unfilled ag jobs. For all the reasons that we know about. It's difficult, it doesn't pay as much, all of those types of things. There's also fewer farms, which also leads down another road and talking about how the whole face of agriculture is changing. But in my opinion, we haven't had a story that really fills the thing that leads to the thing type of thing more than this one. This has so many different applications. When we talk about reducing the usage of pesticides and chemicals, I mean, that's enormous on a number of levels in terms of reducing costs for the grower. And also just the environmental benefits as well. Okay, that's an obvious one. So just right there. And then we talk about, I think there was a line in there where it talked about one person could control up to 8 of these vehicles at one time.
Yeah.
So again, when you look at the fact that the whole face of ag is changing so dramatically, the fact that you could control a fleet of these vehicles out in your fields is incredible.
Yeah.
And how that frees you up for more time. And again, going to that, leading to other things. Right now, we're just in orchards, and it makes sense because of the width of the field and the whole dynamics of the plants and their proximity to each other. But when you look about dairy farms around here, so much time is spent growing basically feed crops. You look at hay and straw and field corn, and so much time is spent harvesting and growing and caring for those crops. Man, if you can use something like this at some point, if they can get an even smaller version, they do have a mini version, but if they can even get a smaller version of this going, where we can fit in some of these other crops, other fields, it'll be amazing, and it will be revolutionary in terms of how it changes the way farmers can spend more time applying some of the science and data that we know about agriculture to improve their yields and not be working 14 hours a day. I mean, just a quality of life dynamic that this could lead to. Then we get into health benefits and everything else. It's really incredible in terms of where this could go and how wide of an impact this could have. And then the last thing is when you look at the battery technology. One of the most intriguing things about this is how it keeps the battery cool. We always have trouble with it because it is a lithium-ion battery that's used here. It's an autonomous vehicle. It's electric, all that good stuff. But the battery technology and the way it's able to keep the battery cool, when you're looking at these environments, now you're not moving at 100 miles an hour,
Right.
but they're dusty. You're out there for 8-10 hours at a time, whatever the case might be. For them to keep those electronics cool and functioning while still preserving battery life and not giving up on range, well, that's all the stuff we talk about. That's a challenge right now for electric vehicles.
Right.
So if we're improving it here, and we already see all these other benefits, and then we can take that potentially down the line to semi-trucks, to cars, and everything else, huge potential opportunities here.
Well, I think it's an incredible opportunity where right now you have one person controlling a fleet of 8 of these, but I could see that one person being in a central location and controlling multiple fleets, all across the globe. Anna, do you also like how Jeff had welcomed us to his new abbreviation of the thing?
TTTLTTT?
Yes. Your weekly TTTLTTT rolls off the tongue.
It does.
Rolls off the tongue.
I'm just a lazy typer.
You saved so many characters.
Let's make Jeff a TTT t-shirt of it so we can put it on there.
A TTTLTTT?
T.
One thing that comes with this advanced equipment in agriculture is the cost. I mean, this is a very costly vehicle. Just the gas-powered one, I could find a price for that was $307,000. But even at that price point, as of last year, 200 of these gas-powered vehicles are already in service in the U.S. and Australia. That's according to Future Farming. I pulled a quote from Chris Davison, director of high-value crops at John Deere. He said watching the Gus sprayers in action was overwhelming at first. And I had the same reaction to that, watching how it worked, just going up and down the orchard. It was, I don't know, it kind of blew my mind a little bit. And it made sense. The John Deere partnership with Gus Automation just made sense, right? Because it seems like one of John Deere's big plays right now is in the communication of these devices, tethering them together. And, it's important, they say, you need to automate and use this technology to help continue feeding the world. And now you're going to be able to likely use these in remote areas as well, because they can probably tether to Starlink. And it'll be interesting to see if John Deere becomes more of a communications service for this equipment, or that winds up becoming a much larger piece of the business, just because all of the technology that they're putting on these vehicles.
Well, I think they're basically enabling the implementation, the integration of them. Hopefully they don't get too far away from their core business, because they're really good at building ag and off-road vehicles.
You don't want to see John Deere tech provider?
No.
Get a line of cell phones?
No, leave that to the people who do that.
Yeah, okay. I mean, you got to diversify. All right. Our next most popular story. If we're workshopping the acronym, producer Alex says the T3L T3. I think you save another character there.
But I think you need to use those as, like, you need to put them on top. What do you call it? Like the
the cube.
Oh, T cubed?
yeah.
That's like 9 T's. Oh, we're getting spinning wheels here. All right. Our next most popular story. Workers get prison for role in corn mill explosion. In October, a federal jury convicted a pair of senior employees at the Deere milling corn plant in Wisconsin for faking records and obstructing the investigation that followed a fatal dust explosion that happened in 2017. Last week, a judge sentenced 50-year-old Derek Clark, Deere's vice president of operations, and 45-year-old Sean Mesner, the former food safety superintendent, both to 2 years in prison. This is according to multiple reports. 5 workers died in the explosion that happened at the corn mill in Cambria, Wisconsin in 2017. Clark falsified compliance certifications and lied to investigators. Mesner is guilty of misleading OSHA investigators by including false information on cleaning records. The company settled on a $1 million fine in September after pleading guilty to environmental and safety charges. Deere also has to pay $10.25 million to the estates of the workers killed in the blast. 5 other workers have either pleaded guilty or been convicted of their role in the accident. And Anna, I think at the core of this story is that, well, one, there's actually some real accountability for these bad actors. And the second is just a reminder that corn dust and all dust is combustible, especially when in high concentrations.
Yeah, I mean, the combustible dust lesson, I feel like, is one that we should all know by now.
Right.
Although consistently on this podcast, we talk about stuff that seems like very basic safety information that people are just not complying with for whatever reason. Yeah, this is such a sad story because it appears that the dysfunction and the deception sort of preceded this incident, meaning that the company has a culture built around cutting corners. And it had a deadly impact here, obviously. So you mentioned some of the other employees that were sentenced. There was an environmental manager named Joseph Winch, and I found his story to be especially interesting, too, because he was sentenced to 2 years in prison, 2 years of supervised release, and a $10,000 fine for conspiring to falsify Deere's environmental compliance certifications. He pled guilty to the conspiracy charge before the trial, but the court's sentencing took into consideration his effort to obstruct the trial of his co-defendants by committing perjury during his trial testimony. Mesner, as you mentioned, also provided untruthful testimony to OSHA during a sworn statement. Clark was also said to have made false and misleading statements during a sworn deposition. To me, this is like alarm bells are going off. Like, to me, like when you see that repeatedly here, to me, it feels like a boys club or whatever, for lack of a better term, right?
Yeah.
Colluding to obstruct and protect one another as this investigation is going on. And I think you can see the signs of this early, whether you're in on it or not, when you're in a workplace.
Yeah.
Just my opinion. But I think secondly, too, the top-down culture anywhere must be very transparent with itself and, you know, be looking at the role that they play in terms of the expectations that they set, in terms of allowing this stuff to fester, maybe giving too much responsibility to certain actors within the facility. I don't know, because faking cleanup of combustible dust.
Yeah.
Why would anyone do this? I mean, like, unless they either think it doesn't matter, to your point, they don't understand the safety risk, which is like indefensible if this is your industry, or they figure they're going to get in trouble if they don't fill out this form.
Right.
You know, and so that's the thing you have to think about too, is that, like, you know, you have these workplaces where the culture is like, get it done whatever way you have to. I don't care how it gets done. It just gets done. These are the directives. And people make bad choices when they're under duress like that. And so I think that the fact that all of these people did the same thing, they all faked stuff, they all lied before and after.
Yeah.
To me, that is a culture problem. That is not just like one bad actor who made a mistake. This is like, I don't know. It seems like to me there's something clearly wrong here institutionally that has pervaded the culture at this place.
No, 100%. A third man who actually cooperated with the investigation. I guess this would be like a fourth man then, 'cause you had the third. He was sentenced to probation and he only received a $5,000 fine. During his testimony, he referred to, quote, a pervasive culture of regulatory defiance and dishonesty several times. And that included lying to state and federal regulators. I also wanted to note that the explosion injured about a dozen other employees, some who've lost limbs. We're talking about the 5 who died, but like many people, their lives are permanently altered. Prosecutors wanted 5 years for Clark and 3 for Mesner. And I wanted to pull one quote, Jeff, before we jump to you from Clark, from his testimony, right? Just because you talk about that culture. And I thought this was kind of spoke volumes to that. Clark started by saying that those who died were not nameless faces to me. He says that he started in 2015 and tried to correct the mill's safety weaknesses. He said, quote, I did not create the problems, but I did not fix them either. I could have done better. So that part kind of blew my mind a little bit because it's like he came in 2015, 2 years before this happened, saw probably a culture that was just rampant with like safety violations, wanted to do something. And Jeff, it looks like for whatever reason, he either became complacent, complicit, or just ignored them entirely.
When did he say that?
He said that at his sentencing.
Okay.
Yeah.
So roughly 6.5 years after the fact, that means 0 to me.
Okay.
That means absolutely nothing. For you to see that and to see how this is going on, if he said that maybe like after it happened or shortly around that time period, maybe I could read something into it.
Well, I mean, he could, but I mean, like, it's one of those where if you're going to a trial or you might be prosecuted, that's something you don't want to say publicly,
I would go the other way. I would say he's saying it to try to get some sort of leniency or, I don't know, mercy. People feel better about him or something. I don't know. To me,
Jeff's not behind
rings
it.
Very hollow.
Yeah,
and I guess this one especially hits with me. I mean, this is close to us here. This is Sun Prairie. This is Cambria. I mean, I played football against some of these people working in this plant. I guarantee it. When I was in high school, so what I get frustrated with is when we look at this, especially because they really laud themselves as a family-oriented company and all this other stuff.
Yeah,
and the reality is, when OSHA just nails them with these fines, which is good, okay, $1.8 million in fines, great. Putting these people in jail, which never happens in manufacturing.
Yeah.
That just does not happen. That's great. But the other part of this is, why did it take this long, first of all? Yeah. Because a lot of the momentum that may have been going in terms of making an example out of these folks sort of faded with time. Again, this was 2017 when this happens, and they're not sentenced until early 2024.
Yeah, I feel like maybe the pandemic had something to do with that. Maybe. I don't know.
I don't know. I have a hard time with it because it does resonate very closely. And as Anna alluded to, it's a huge.
We could see the smoke from our office.
Right.
Yeah.
And as Anna said, this is a cultural thing. So if it's a family company, and there's somebody you can definitely point to, when you find the company, that hurts the company.
Yeah.
And along with that company is 250 other people who weren't at fault here, who are basically going to work to do their jobs every day. So I think what we need to do is take this a step further. DOJ got involved in this instance, which is good. Kudos to OSHA for taking that extra step and doing that, going to that extent. But I think we also need to look at the owners of this company, because by 2021, they were getting $60 million in federal contracts.
Yeah.
Okay, the business wasn't hurt, and therefore the owners of the business weren't impacted. They weren't made to change the culture of their company, because once this was over, they kept moving on. And they had their guys who took the fall for it and nothing else. So instead of some of these fines that potentially hurt the workers there who weren't necessarily negligent, how about we get involved here and really try to fix the culture by putting some punitive damages against those individuals? I'm not talking 5 or 10 grand. That's not going to change a behavior. I'm talking about start garnishing their wages and putting that back into the factory. You're the CEO, you're the owner of this company. You can't tell me you didn't know what was going on here. You don't get a paycheck this year.
Yeah.
Then maybe you'll start to institute real change, because as long as the company is allowed to hide a lot of this stuff, and not really come forward. And this isn't a publicly traded company. There's no SEC filing associated here that they have to explain why revenues were down. No, hit them where it hurts, because otherwise these things are going to continue to get, pardon the pun, swept under the rug, not being addressed. The other thing is, for anyone, and after, what was it, 2007 or 8, that Imperial Sugar explosion down in Georgia, for anybody in this industry to not be aware of combustible dust explosions and the possible impacts, you're kidding yourself. Nobody's going to buy that anymore.
No, I don't think they ever said they didn't realize the dangers of combustible dust. I think it was just that anytime this is talked about now, that's always added just as a, like, in case anyone wasn't aware and they're reading about it. I think they knew the inherent risk, which is wild to me that they wouldn't have at least tried to remedy that. And I know that there's like some pretty capital intensive systems, but the solutions are out there in terms of like reining in the combustible dust in a facility.
And again, this isn't some small, mom and pop shop. This is $100 million company.
Yeah. So you're saying go after them Sackler style.
Sackler style?
Well, like how they went after the family, like in the opioid crisis.
Yeah.
The end to the limited liability corporation?
I think in some instances, again, when there's criminal damage here, I think you do have to go a step further. It's going to be more complicated when you get into a publicly traded company in terms of identifying those individuals. But here you did have an opportunity to do that. And again, when you're talking about culture, and that's what we keep coming back to with all of these safety issues, how else do you break the culture?
Yeah. Well, maybe these guys were pretty high up in the company. Maybe when it came to like trying to trace it back all the way up the ladder, like maybe they just couldn't find that tie. But I know what you mean. What you're saying is that like,
I understand the current limitations.
Yeah.
If we want to change some of the stuff, that's the next step in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, John seems to agree with all of us. John, who's watching us live, says 2 years seems lenient when there are deaths. And I think we'd all agree, John, but I think that it is kind of a big move that there was actually some prison time, and not just a fine. All right. Our next most popular story. Cleveland Cliffs to shutter tin plant after tariff ruling. Cleveland Cliffs last week announced plans to close down a tin production facility in West Virginia and lay off some 900 workers. The move comes after the International Trade Commission voted not to impose tariffs on tin imports. The Trade Commission says the imports don't sufficiently harm the U.S. steel industry. Well, what about now? The U.S. Department of Commerce says the products are sold in the U.S. at less than fair value, subsidized by China. Anti-dumping and countervailing duties can be used to help prevent or counteract such actions. Cleveland Cliffs said it will offer severance packages and potential relocation packages, and the company has some 28,000 workers in the U.S. and Canada. CEO Lorenzo Goncalves said it could no longer produce tin plate viably because they were, quote, forced to operate on an uneven playing field. Jeff, is that a fair assessment that it was just no longer viable? It was an uneven playing field, and Cleveland Cliffs' hands were tied when it came to whether or not this plant stayed open?
It kind of feels that way. I don't know that they did have a lot of options. It's just a shifting dynamic in the marketplace right now. And really, I know when we first started looking at some of these tariffs, when you look at the subsidizing that was going on by some of these governments in terms of allowing these companies to quote unquote dump tin onto the U.S. market, it would seem like an open and shut case, especially when the U.S. Department of Commerce basically came down and said, yes, this is what they're doing.
Yeah.
But when you take a step back, which again, this is unusual because at first when you read this, you're like, well, this is a no doubter here.
Yeah.
But when you take a step back and you realize the sort of the scale of what we're really looking at here in terms of tin cans and how they're used and who uses them, the deck was stacked against Cleveland Cliffs right from the start. This was going to be very difficult. And remember, when it went to the International Trade Commission, again, this is a U.S. regulatory agency, it was over 0-4. It was a unanimous vote in putting this down. And a lot of that comes from all of the different entities that were against these tariffs. Mm-hmm. And you look at all of the consumer packaged good companies, the food companies, the cosmetic companies, They want some cheap containers.
Yeah.
And you know what? If we're being real honest as consumers, we're kind of on board with that too. Okay. So that's really what was at play here. And when you look at what Cleveland-Cliffs was up against, just looking at a statement here from the Consumer Brand Association, the consumer brandless effort. So they were working, they were definitely being proactive in working against this, has resulted in a true victory for U.S. consumers and manufacturers with the International Trade Commission's unanimous vote to reject new tariffs on tin meal steel. And just to give you an idea as who's on the executive committee of this association, we're looking at folks from Clorox, Smuckers, let's see who else we got here, Danone, General Mills, Molson Coors, Hormel. I mean, all of the big CPG companies.
Yeah.
So this was just not going to happen because these folks want to keep their packaging costs down.
Yeah.
Tin has never been a huge focus in the U.S. There hasn't been a tin mine in the U.S. for 20 some years or more. So you can see there was just a lot of the market dynamics, even though it's unfortunate to see this facility closing. This was one of those things that when you look at what the marketplace was calling for and the realities of it, it was probably never going to happen.
I will not stand for paying 1 more cent on my canned cat food.
Yeah. One other thing here, the one thing, and I don't know, maybe Anna can comment on this too, but I think it was a mistake bringing in Canada and Germany as well.
Yeah.
I think if they focus on China,
they
may have had a chance, because when you look at the margins and what was being added in terms of the cost and how they had to be subsidized to be profitable here in the U.S., I mean, the stuff coming from China was ridiculous.
Yeah.
Is.
So we're talking specifically about steel sheets that are coated with a thin layer of tin. And like Jeff alluded to, they're used in a lot of food cans and other consumer goods. Anna, they said the deck was stacked. Multiple said the deck was stacked against them. Was this a foregone conclusion?
I don't know about that, but I do think that Jeff is exactly right that, and to be honest, I didn't appreciate the article. It was a Associated Press article. Mm-hmm. It put a lot of emphasis on the tariff ruling and that the Trade Commission was refusing to apply the anti-dumping rules and stuff. And there was no counterpoint to that.
Yeah.
And I think the counterpoint on that is very important. And you got into it a little bit as well. But, the term anti-dumping, I think, gets misinterpreted a little bit because it's such a negative term. But domestic steelmakers like them, but they risk raising prices for consumers. And once you take international competition out of the picture, then you leave it to the domestic metal companies to set the floor for that. And from a consumer standpoint and a supply chain standpoint, nobody wants that. Right. So, I just don't, it sounds like they're flooding the market with cheap steel, but in fact, this is just, they're just undercutting Cleveland-Cliffs a little bit on price. And, anti-dumping regulations have become very much open to interpretation to the point where they can be applied to like a foreign producer that's priced below a domestic one, even a little. Mm-hmm. That's not something that we want to get into. We really don't, American consumers, they want cheap products, but if we built and made everything here in America, we wouldn't get that. And that's not what everybody wants, So it's a little more complex, I think, than the article laid it out. But the other thing that really put a bad taste in my mouth about this particular incident, I think, was that Cleveland-Cliffs wants to blame the foreign entities for this. They want to blame the International Trade Commission for this, for the loss of jobs, the economic impact on this region, which will be immense. It's a very small town. But they also have some interesting stuff going on that sort of indicates to me that they have a track record of hanging out to dry the regions that they invest in. Here I'm referring to a contentious battle that's been taking place for years between Cleveland-Cliffs and Marquette County, Michigan, where the company allegedly abandoned a mine project about 7 years ago, and they owe local and state taxes of about $50 million since then that they have not paid. The officials say that sum is putting a strain on municipalities for things like school costs, fire trucks. They issued a press release about this, which was very unorthodox, but to the point where they have been trying to work it out in the court for so long, and they just want Cleveland Cliffs to pay.
So the city put out a press release?
The county.
Yeah. Okay.
And to me, it just felt like another instance of a big company kind of taking what they need and then bailing when they see fit. And then these communities are left holding the bag. And in Weirton, the city council is already talking about how they can get Cleveland Cliffs to continue to pay fire and police service fees, even if the plant is vacant, because it makes such a difference to that town, just those fees, so it's hard to see the blowback of this hit these communities. And if you see Cleveland Cliffs do it elsewhere, you know that it's not always them just being like, we are a victim of circumstance.
Yeah.
I think that they need to take some responsibility for what has happened here as well, because it's not just this issue.
Yeah.
Never is.
Well, and so the Cleveland Cliffs CEO, Lorenzo Goncalves, he said the company and the steelworkers really did fight to keep the plant open. When you think about some of his rhetoric, when he called the Trade Commission's decision a travesty for America, middle-class jobs, and our critical food supply chains, and the point I thought you were going to drive home a little bit more was that, he kind of attacked the people that he could without firebombing relationships that exist in other parts of his business, right? We're when you talk about the Consumer Brands Association, that's truly who is, their customer, right? And they're truly the ones that are pushing this forward. But he kind of has to still play nice because he needs them in other aspects of the business, right?
Absolutely.
You talk about it being a small town. Weirton has a population of 19,000. It's about 40 miles west of Pittsburgh, and that threw me. I was just like, in what way? And I kind of neglected the little panhandle part of West Virginia. This facility goes way back. The tin facility once was on an 800-acre property operated by Weirton Steel, which employed 6,100 workers as recently as 1994. But things fluctuated and changed. They filed bankruptcy protection in 2003. I found an interesting article, though. A lot of times we talk about when there's relocation efforts or, there are likely other manufacturing jobs in the area, right, that they can move to. Well, according to the Post-Gazette, many workers have already interviewed for positions down the street at a Massachusetts-based Form Energy new battery plant that is likely to open this summer. So when we talk about how there's such a demand for manufacturing jobs, this is a real case where a number of them have already applied for relocation, and a number of them might be able to catch on at another battery plant down the road. Hopefully. Mm-hmm. One thing I also pulled out was the local union president, Mark Gliptis, his quote, because it was just a good union president quote. He says, "To me, it's an act of treason. It's absolutely the wrong decision for America and its people." So
it's good for that one plant only. So that's the thing,
Yeah. And Doug chimes in. He says, "Hey, I'm back." So, it's good to
welcome back.
It's good to see you, Doug. Welcome back. All right. Well, our next most popular story this week. Subaru idles plants after worker crushed to death. Work stopped temporarily at 3 Subaru facilities after tragedy struck at an assembly plant in Japan. Earlier this month, a 60-year-old factory worker was killed after a 25-ton mold fell on top of him. Automotive News said the worker was a 35-year veteran who had been a 35-year veteran at the plant who had been operating a crane by himself. He was lifting and moving the molds with a remote control when one of them collapsed and pinned him against another mold. While the shutdown is expected to be short-lived, it will still hurt Subaru, which wanted to grow production in Japan. According to Car Scoops, Subaru is beefing up EV efforts in Japan, where it will first build electrics despite US being its largest market. For now, the top priority is safety, and the company is investigating just what caused the accident. According to Auto News, such problems are rare for the automaker. And Anna, while these problems and accidents may be rare, they don't make them any less tragic.
No, this is a really horrible story. Just really heartbreaking. And the first thing I thought of is just how many stories we've seen coming out of Japan lately about incidents within their manufacturing community. You consider that Japan has a history of manufacturing prowess, right?
Yeah.
Very well-structured history. It's a well-structured society with laws governing safety issues. And yet there have been multiple high-profile scandals recently pertaining to top manufacturers like Subaru. We saw the Daihatsu shut down for falsifying tests. We saw Toyota's diesel division with flawed tests. We saw Hino with false emissions data, and now you have this, at Subaru. So I'm not saying that all these things are necessarily connected, but I do think it's notable to point out that Japan has long been notorious for a work culture that's very serious and very demanding. Long hours, commitment, company loyalty. And you wonder if that type of environment where loyalty is so valued, if that allows operational or safety or even ethical issues to get pushed aside as everyone works hard to kind of toe the company line. You do see that sometimes. And I'd say too that that this is a problem, if left unchecked, that could get worse when you consider that Japan has a worker shortage that sort of preceded the everyone else worker shortage, before it was cool, Japan had a worker shortage. They have a shrinking population. They have an aging population, something the U.S. will see soon enough in the coming decades as well. But I think it probably adds this immense pressure to just get things done, maybe overlooking some of those problem areas. So I don't know. It just, as you said, it's just a really tragic story all told. And then to consider that this employee was very long-term employee with Subaru, nearing retirement, that just gutting to see this take place. And you hope that that as these incidents roll out, that collectively maybe someone could look at it in the lens of maybe we have some problem areas as it pertains to how we operate as a work culture here.
No, it definitely, I thought of a lot of the same incidents just because we've covered them so much on the podcast. And it makes you wonder are those efforts sustainable? It seems like a lot of checks are getting cashed in the manufacturing industry lately, and we're seeing a lot of compliance efforts fall short, and a lot of safety initiatives kind of be non-existent. Jeff, to you, I mean, is this both kind of a larger issue in terms of Japanese work culture, or is this also a good example of how maybe a worker that's been doing it this way forever, kind of got, blind to the alarm, right? They've done it this way so many times that they never thought that something could go wrong, and then it finally did.
I mean, that's always a possibility.
We had a lot of skeptics on the site that thought the same thing. Just hey, he's probably been doing it that way for years.
That doesn't excuse it, though.
No,
I understand where you're coming from, and I can understand where they're coming from too. But when you got a 25-ton mold, now let's be a little pragmatic here, okay? Stepping aside the safety concerns here that were realized and tragic and horrible, the cost of that 25-ton mold is enormous. Okay, so the damage that was done to that, in addition to the catastrophic effect from a safety perspective, when you combine those things, there's got to be something that we can work with there to help people get better. Because I agree with Ann 100%. Whether it's this incident, we've covered stuff on cargo ships, we've covered stuff in food plants. It all comes down to either not having enough people in place, not having the right safety protocols in place, because you were focused on getting it done. Okay, and that is prominent throughout manufacturing. There's never enough time. We always got to get stuff out the door. And that's what led to this situation. Doesn't matter how long he's been doing it. That's why he was the only person doing it, because they were in a hurry and they didn't want to allocate more manpower to something when they could be doing something else.
Yeah.
Recently, the SEC has passed along guidelines that I think maybe are something we can apply to safety. They applied it to cybersecurity, basically saying if you're hit by a ransomware attack, if you have a malware breach, if you have data theft, whatever the case is, you have to report that in your annual or quarterly reports. You need to make that available because it impacts your company on a number of levels.
Yeah.
It impacts cost controls, it impacts revenue generation, it impacts potential new business, reputation, all of those things. you need to disclose it. As a result, collectively, and we've seen this in manufacturing, everybody's gotten better because they don't want to have to put that stuff in their reports. They don't want to say, yeah, we got hit by a ransomware attack and $10 million that should have been going to shareholders, we had to pay, Lockbit.
Yeah.
Okay. So maybe taking that similar approach, because all of those same elements are exactly the same when you look at safety concerns. It does affect your reputation. It does affect cost. It does affect profits. When you're looking at what's going to go here in terms of the repairing the damage, things that are going to be having to be done from a safety perspective to address what happened, and also taking care of your workforce.
Or just the downtime.
All of those things.
Yeah.
That's all costing you money and having an impact potentially on the shareholder, in addition to all the other stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Not trying to get away from that. Make them report that. Make them put that out to the public and say, you know what? Some of the things that we're missing here are as a result of these safety issues, these OSHA fines, all of these other things that we had to deal with. Maybe that's how you start changing the culture. Because again, this isn't a technology issue. We got the tools. We understand how to make these places safer and avoid these types of incidents. But there's not that lack of accountability at a higher level that is making people change right now.
Yeah. And is that what we need? The accountability at a higher level, or reporting?
Well, I do think that that's a fair point, because how else do you change an embedded culture? You have to figure out if it's coming from the top down, and they say that about culture, that's how you change it. It comes from the top down. Then, sadly, I guess it has to have an ROI also. You have to look at it and say, what are we going to gain from this that we can, as Jeff said, go back to our shareholders and kind of hedge ourselves against pushback for these investments that we're going to make to be safer and more effective.
Well, unfortunately, and hopefully, I think it's just that these are the stories that make the news and we report on, because when they do realize the ROI, when they are investing in the tools that are out there, that's not a story, right? Like, hey, auto manufacturer does right thing. No one reads that story.
True.
When you talk about ROI, Doug chimes in. He says, safety is your best insurance policy. And John also raises a good point. He says tool changes in the automotive industry are super fast and big pieces of steel that are going in and out of machines within seconds. So unfortunately, it's hard when we have to cover these stories just to be like, no, it's a reminder of how a good safety culture is more about risk management and mitigation and cost savings in terms of when some sort of tragedy like this strikes.
Oh yeah. And it's not, and this is not just specific to Japan. I know we're talking about it within that context, but we talk about this all the time. Companies that are under the gun right now, and they're just doing what they can to get stuff done, and they're maybe cutting corners, or they're skipping steps, or they figured out a workaround, and then it only works until it comes back to bite you. So you got to be careful to not let it get that far. It just...
All right. Well, our most popular story was actually a series of stories that I just put under the umbrella of Ford drama. Our most popular story was Ford to rethink where it builds vehicles. And I thought that pretty interesting companion pieces to that were really popular articles on the website that included, first, auto workers threatened to strike again at Ford's huge Kentucky truck plants. And then, finally, Ford and UAW reached local contract agreement at Kentucky truck plant. So let's get into it. Last week, CEO Jim Farley said the automaker will need to, quote, think carefully about where it builds future vehicles. Farley said Ford always took pride in its relationship with the UAW, and then the company's big truck plant in Louisville, Kentucky, was the first truck plant that the UAW shut down. As the company transitions from internal combustion to EVs, Farley says, quote, we have to think carefully about our manufacturing footprint. Shots fired. 3 days later, the UAW threatened to go on strike. And can you guess where? The union threatened to have 9,000 workers at the Kentucky truck plant walk out tomorrow, February 23rd, if a contract dispute wasn't resolved. At issue are minimum implant nurse staffing, ergonomic issues, and the company's effort to reduce the number of skilled trades workers. 2 days later, Ford and the UAW came to terms and crisis averted. Jeff, this very specific crisis averted, but I feel like a much larger showdown is brewing.
Yeah, I guess when I look at this combination of stories, to me, it feels like we've got a combination of short-term, long-term perspectives on what's going on right now and really the automotive aftermarket. I think from a short term, the UAW is in a great spot right now. They came out ahead with the recent strike. They really came out looking very strong. And I think they have leverage right now because the automakers, and I think Ford, in terms of their response to these things, is a little bit more forward-thinking in terms of it's closer to them. Yeah. It's just what it feels like anyway. They have the most UAW members. It feels closer, like they're more on top of it, whereas some of the other automakers are a little more reactive. Ford always, to me anyway, has seemed more aggressive. So while the UAW is looking short-term, and these folks at this particular facility, because the stuff they were looking for doesn't seem that agree. Like this seems like pretty basic stuff that probably would have been handled or should have been handled sooner. Yeah. But because they've really got the upper hand right now, they can push it and say, no, don't tell me you're going to do it next month. You're going to do it now or we're out of here.
Yeah.
And they can do that and they can play that because, again, Ford doesn't have a lot of choice. They've got to respond to this. They've got to give them what they need right now, especially because this would play really poorly in the press if they actually went on strike for these particular things, which basically comes down to a safer work environment.
Yeah.
I mean, so, and I think in response to that, though, while the UAW is looking right now, Ford is looking longer term. Yeah. And they're looking at the success they've had, particularly in moving a lot of manufacturing operations to Mexico. Just to give you a little perspective, a Mexican auto worker, they make about in a day what a U.S. automaker makes an hour. Okay, so there's a ton of cost savings there. And when you're looking at manufacturing infrastructure that is essentially, a semi-truck drive away, that gets real appealing. Now, right now, the Mexican vehicle production marketplace is about a third that of the U.S., but it continues to grow. Now, again, shifting to a long-term perspective, because to me, that's what Ford is kind of saying in terms of looking at where else they can make stuff. Yeah, we're gonna do this right now and take care of the auto workers, but we're also gonna preserve what we may want to do longer term in terms of where it makes more sense to make product. Which he pointed out the deficiency they have in terms of what it costs to make a vehicle and everything else. What they had from a competitive advantage, wasn't it like $7 billion or something like that in terms of the competitive loss they have compared to others.
Yeah.
I think he's looking at Mexico, and I think if Sean Fain was smart, he would start looking at Mexico and trying to see what they can do down there. They have some labor unions down there, but I think that's where they should be looking to make a stronger case for some solidarity on the workforce, because if they don't start upping some of those wages down south of the border, I think Ford's not the only one who's going to be looking at reevaluating where else they want to make stuff. I don't think it's going to be a tidal wave shift.
Right.
But I think you could see more stuff. And I think that's what he is alluding to here. And I don't think you can blame him. I'm not advocating for it. I know there's a lot of organic benefits, obviously, to manufacturing in the U.S. We're all proponents of that. No one here is anti-U.S. jobs.
Yeah.
Anna just doesn't like jobs in general.
Just no jobs whatsoever. Yeah.
So I think that it's a lot of balancing there. Fain's been talking to Tesla and VW and Toyota and all those folks. Important.
Yeah.
But again, I'd start looking south of the border too.
Well, and we've seen a couple of stories over the last couple of weeks where the Department of Labor has been playing a much larger role in Mexican operations as well.
Yeah.
Anna, did it seem uncharacteristic for Farley to kind of come out and be so blunt about it? It definitely seemed like, I don't know. It seemed like he normally was, more of a read between the lines in his statements. And this one is just like, hey, you know what? Maybe we don't make them here anymore. Or maybe we don't work with the UAW as nice anymore because look what that got us.
Well, I mean, it does seem like Farley's finally playing the game that Sean Fain started with him with some of this more aggressive rhetoric. I was a little surprised to see it, but at the same time, I was like, okay, I mean, this is kind of what we started here. Making these comments to the media and throwing them out there in the public eye. Jeff mentions Mexico. I think that there's another option here that he could be alluding to, but potentially just moving plants further south in the United States.
That's what I was thinking.
Rather than become a target of the union, I think Farley is like putting it all out there. And, I can see why, he feels burned. He said this because Ford makes all of its pickups here in the U.S. and the first pickup plant to be shut down during the strike was his plant in Kentucky. So why, Ford's footprint currently is heavily concentrated in the upper Midwest, Michigan, Illinois, Ohio, much like the other automakers in the big three. But its latest plant projects are notably further south. It has a project underway in Tennessee and one in Kentucky, and that is a trend in the automotive industry. You're seeing many automakers set up shop in the anti-union South, where wages tend to be lower. There's generally right-to-work laws there. I saw a report about this concept that said that almost every foreign auto factory that's opened since the 1990s has sprouted below the Mason-Dixon line. So if that tells you something. And this has to be a threat to the UAW. Especially as the transition to EVs gets underway and you're seeing the auto plants and battery plants that are going to the southern states. There's less of a labor component involved. It's cheaper to do it down there. We've seen time and time again those southern states win those contracts. So I think if Farley wants to hit back at UAW a little bit and hit him where it hurts, this argument has teeth a little bit, and Farley knows it. So I think it's for him to kind of dangle this out in front of the UAW and say, hey, look, we have some options where we can sidestep you entirely. Keep that in mind. Yeah. He's just playing hardball as well.
No, I thought it was definitely a warning shot. And we talked about it a lot during the strike, but maybe it is just as simple as Fain is trying to get the union as much as it can right now because he knows that, there might be an end to that road kind of in the near future when there is that EV transition. All right. Well, before we move on to, in case you missed it, the stories that maybe weren't as popular on a website, but still stand to make a big impact on the industry going forward, we have yet another word from our sponsor, Teledyne FLIR.
Hi, I'm David Manti, and with me right now is Rob Milner with FLIR. Rob, does manufacturing have a leak problem?
David's been well established by very reputable agencies like the U.S. Department of Energy that as much as 25 or 30% of a manufacturing plant's total installed compressed air capacity is being lost to leaks right now.
That's a lot.
It is.
So let's talk about it. Join us for Acoustic Imaging for Manufacturing, how to capture cost savings through sound on February 27th at 11 a.m. Eastern. Rob's going to give us a little bit more on how we can fix this leak problem. Right, Rob?
You betcha.
And we're back. Did you know that up to 30% of your plant's total compressed air capacity is being lost to leaks right now? Well, that air is cheap, that power isn't. So join myself and Rob Milner from Teledyne FLIR. We're going to be live February 27th at 11 a.m. Eastern, a little bit early, but hey, we all get up early, to learn about how manufacturers are using acoustic cameras to catch these problems in real time. We're using really sophisticated point-and-shoot cameras instead of pop-up meat thermometers. But hey, you use the tools that are available at the time. All right, Anna, what is your in case you missed it this week?
I'm coming to you with a little update on a story we covered in September about a stranded space factory that was set out to do some science experiments in space and then was not allowed to come back.
Yeah, doing some space science. And they're like, yeah, why don't you stay there?
Yeah. So here's what's going on. So Varda Space Industries Flying Pharmaceutical Factory has finally been given clearance to come home. It's been stuck in orbit for 8 months. And in September of 2023, the U.S. Air Force denied Varda's request for permission to land a capsule at a Utah training facility. At the time, the Air Force said that it couldn't grant the request due to the overall safety, risk, and impact analysis. Well, finally, Varda has earned FAA approval for a re-entry attempt, and they are, quote, proud because they say it is the first time the U.S. has granted a Part 450 re-entry license allowing a commercial entity to land a spacecraft on U.S. soil. And that part made me LOL because it just makes it feel that much more remiss to not file for this before the rocket took the factory out to space. We know back in September because the FAA confirmed this, that Varda had launched its vehicle into space without a re-entry license. We know that.
Yeah.
Now we know that the re-entry license of a commercial entity had never been awarded to anyone.
No, this is a win. This is a win. It wasn't their fault.
And Marta's like, we'll just give them a buzz on our way back. I'm sure it's fine.
Hey, just looking for a spot in the lot. If you could free something up for us, we're heading back now.
Okay. I just, I'm glad it worked out in the end. First of all, I really don't trust these people in their HIV research based on this incident, but also just a sort of scary reminder about we're really delving into some uncharted territory here with space exploration and low orbit stuff. And to think that the people who are making this happen are missing some of these very key areas, and maybe the regulatory framework is there, but people don't understand it, or I don't know. But how this got approved to get on this rocket and go out to space without any plan for how it would return is sort of alarming to me.
Yeah.
So way to go. You guys sort of got by accident completed your project here, but
you were able to come back. Good job.
Good job. You did it.
It is a little concerning. I know that I was a little bit more on the, hey, if they don't want you back on Earth, why don't you just stay out there because of what you might bring back with you? It is crazy to think that the minds behind the people who can launch, a hands-off pharmaceutical space factory fail to check a box or file a piece of paper. But, that's not something that we have to worry about until, something that's clinging to the vessel winds up attacking all of us.
Is that what you think? Is there going to be a little space lizard that's going to...
Yeah. No, there's,
crawl in your ear and
exactly
turn you into an alien?
While we're sleeping.
Okay.
It wouldn't turn me into an alien. It would use my body to hatch the alien.
It's good that you haven't watched too many sci-fi
No,
movies.
he has not thought about this once.
No, but all joking aside, as Anna said, as we're doing more sort of near orbit and space exploration, there are real consequences to our actions. And if people are willing to, sort of neglect simple things like, hey, did you make sure we got a round trip ticket and not a one-way ticket? When they're willing to neglect that sort of thing, that's when, the part of my brain that goes, hey, wait a minute. Maybe we shouldn't let it back.
Do you have a hey, wait a minute part of your brain?
Yeah.
Are you sure about that?
I do. It normally kicks in.
I don't know if this is a good idea, said David Never.
Yeah, no.
This is kind of you, though, to do something and be
figure it out.
Maybe I shouldn't have done that. That is sort of your mantra.
It's definitely, it's worked for me mostly in the past. I'm at least 51% on it.
I was going to say, it's 50-50.
But no, it's agreed. But I'm not launching pharmaceutical space factories, Jeff.
Well, good.
Yeah, that is good. That is a good thing for everyone.
Do you think this is a little, and it's ridiculous. I know this sounds ridiculous, but just because this has become part of our common dialogue in terms of sending stuff up to space with Elon Musk, and there's others as well, that people are just not approaching it with the respect it deserves.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Yes, I 100% agree.
It's, actually, okay, so Doug actually had the same thought I just said. He said, Doug says, better to seek forgiveness than ask for permission. It's already up there, but
no, not
in all things.
Not better.
Not in all things. You can't just be get it up there. What are they going to say? No.
Yeah, this isn't telling the wife you're going fishing. This is a little different.
Yeah. It was, no, it's a shock to me. And I guess now that it's back, let's see what's on there, huh? Maybe they really made some strides. And thank goodness. Another thing that's kind of stood out to me wasn't part of the story that they made sure they had enough fuel to kind of idle for a year.
Yeah, it was fine out there for a while.
Yeah.
Probably because they're in case
right?
they don't let us come back.
Is this legitimately just a paperwork thing? They had the engineering in place. They just didn't get permission.
I don't know. At the time, we were is the FAA just slapping them on the wrist for the fact that they didn't file anything? But they did not submit anything. We know that.
Well, good for the FAA then. Mm-hmm. Set a precedent here.
I agree.
Yeah. If you don't greenlight something to come back to Earth, it's okay to keep it out there. All right. In case you missed it this week, authorities take down hackers that targeted manufacturers with ransomware attacks. So a joint effort by the U.S. Department of Justice, the UK National Crime Agency's Cyber Division, the FBI, and other international law enforcement partners this week announced a huge win against Lockbit, one of the most active ransomware groups in the world. The task force seized several websites used by the outfit to connect the organization's infrastructure. Authorities also seized control of servers used by their administrators, which could disrupt the bad actors' ability to attack and encrypt networks and extort victims by threatening to publish stolen data. Lockbit has hit more than 2,000 victims, many of them in the manufacturing industry. They've received more than $120 million in ransom payments that we know about and made ransom demands totaling hundreds of millions of dollars. Now, the biggest reason that I chose this story is that with this seizure, it's possible that the victims could potentially get their data back. Lockbit and their homegrown strand of malware is notorious for targeting the industrial sector and were even linked to last year's attacks on Boeing. Now, starting this week, victims that were targeted by Lockbit's malware can contact the FBI to determine whether or not their affected systems can be decrypted. And Jeff, I chose this story for that reason specifically, not just because this is a potential huge blow to one of the biggest pains in the manufacturing industry's cyber neck, but the fact that there might be a lot of information out there that's still tied up and encrypted, and manufacturers might be able to get access to that.
If that is the case, agree 100%. That's enormous. We were talking a lot about when you were putting this one together. I was a little disappointed it didn't get more play on the sites because this is the equivalent. This is like taking down the Unabomber. This is capturing Osama bin Laden. That's what Lockbit is.
Yeah.
Okay. And make no mistake, they still are.
Yeah.
Okay. This was a serious blow, but this is a huge, huge win in the cyber community because Lockbit is a huge thorn in the side, as you alluded to. So it's a big win there. And I think what's encouraging is, even though we do have to worry about somebody just sort of taking their spot, filling in for them and doing the same things they've been doing, we've been hearing more of these stories where it is a multinational law enforcement mission, basically, that comes together and shutting these down. Another big one was they got Hive. Hive was a big one that wasn't really in the industrial sector, but it was targeting schools and hospitals and things like that. There was another one when they shut down the Conti group, which was a big Russian malware group. So there's a lot more of this going on. We were talking about Black Basta last week, and again, figuring out how to encrypt their malware. So as we get more of this, these are huge stories with big ramifications down the line. I think the bigger thing is potentially they could get a lot of this money back as well.
Yeah.
Because most of these hacker groups work in crypto, which has blockchain behind it. So it's very easy to trace and find once you get in there.
Yeah.
So again, this is a huge win, a huge step forward. Can't overstate that enough. And I think the takeaways will come even more down the line. We may not hear about them, but they're definitely going to take place.
So Deputy Attorney General Lisa Monaco, she said that while authorities have now destroyed the online backbone of the Lockbit group, their work, as you said, Jeff, does not stop here. And I don't know if you had a chance to check out the story, but it was encouraging. And maybe it's because, Jeff is so hardcore on the cybersecurity beat now with the Security Breach podcast that we hear so much about like, wow, that all sounds broken. It was nice. It was nice to be like, oh no, they got one.
Yeah.
They got one.
Exactly.
It's not a goose egg in the other column.
Got a big one.
Yeah, it feels like such an insurmountable problem. I think one thing that you've said in the past, Jeff, is that there's no way to stop these entities necessarily, but we can slow them down with our efforts and with the efforts of these these federal groups that go after them. And I agree with you. It would have been nice to see more eyeballs on this story because I think it's a good reminder to note that if you slow them down, you have to make use of that time that you gain back by bolstering your organization and making sure that you are you're effectively able to stave off these types of attacks. If this just goes in one ear and out the other, then slowing them down. Yeah. I mean, there's good that's coming out of this now, but like they're coming right back, right? So, as she says, their work does not stop here, and that's because this stuff is just going to continue to proliferate.
Oh yeah, it's whack-a-mole.
Yeah, exactly. It's whack-a-mole. So just making sure that you see this as key and pivotal and important as it is, but also that there's work to be done on the manufacturing side.
Yeah, they got a big mole.
Did you get a chance to see the follow-up on this too? A little bit that I sent you?
No.
But basically it was cool because this joint task force also put a little bit of a flex in. All these sites that they took over that supporters or part of the Lockbit organization would log into to gain access, see what was next, who the next target was, whatever the case is. They basically said there was a screen that would pop up and it had all the flags of the countries that were involved and they were all around the Lockbit logo.
Oh.
Basically saying, this is no longer functional. We have shut them down. And you might be next.
Oh.
Ooh,
So
all
it was
right.
kind of a flex and
Yeah.
a good one
Yeah.
in that respect, in terms of telling the hackers, hey, we got your number.
That's that's incredible. I'm sorry, I have not clicked the link yet.
No worries.
What is your, in case you missed it this week, Jeff?
So I've got a story, that is going to sound a little negative, but I think actually has a very, very positive dynamic, as you always talk about, in looking at the industry going forward. And it was an article talking about how U.S. product recalls surged 11% last year, and it was a 7-year high. Okay, so it said in 2003, again, recalls increased 11%. This is according to the Sedgwick Brand Protection's 2024 State of the Nation Recall Index. Now, the big thing is here, the number of defective units recalled actually went down. There was just more actual recalls that took place.
Okay.
And I'm not going to go through all of the stats here, but some of the stuff that really stood out to me is when we look at things like food and drugs. Okay. So there were more food recalls in 2023. It was a 5-year high and 19.6% more in 2023 than 22. We look at the medical device industry. They experienced a second consecutive year of growth, rising. There was 3 out of the number of impacted units fell to a 6-year low, but there was 975 events, which was much more than the previous year. The reason I wanted to bring up all this stuff is, especially when it comes to food and medical devices, this is good stuff. Okay, we are not getting worse at making things. We're getting better at the QA level in terms of identifying problems. Hopefully, before they get in the hands of too many people. Now, it's too bad that it actually got to market that a recall was needed. But the fact that there was more issued last year than any other year before, I think, again, is very positive. Because one of the least exciting things to invest in, as we all know, is software. Okay. Yeah. But when we talk about accountability and understanding where your stuff is, who's got it, in other terms, traceability, which is another term manufacturers cringe at because of all the costs associated with it. There are so many inherent benefits to getting out in front of these things, issuing the recall, getting bad product out of the supply chain. More benefits, obviously, to all of that than something bad happening to somebody getting sick. Just from a reputational damage, like when we talk about cyber attacks, in terms of long-term product image, all those things can be hopefully identified much more quickly with the number of recalls. And the fact that we have systems in place to respond to these things more quickly and then learn from them as well, I think is a huge benefit to the entire sector. So, excuse me.
Well, I mean, you talk about how a lot of times when we're talking about regulatory things, they don't have enough teeth. But a lot of it seems like 2024 is going to bring a lot more scrutiny, particularly on food and beverage, medical device, and pharmaceutical. And those are all due to investments and changes in the FDA.
Right.
So, no, I think that this is definitely make a big impact going forward, and it has to do with my final thought. So great segue. And Anna, your thought on the uptick, when it comes to recalls, is it good that there's an uptick? Like, is it, I mean, Jeff was really glasses half full on this one, and it was a little shocking.
It was a refreshing glass.
It was a refreshing glass.
I agree with Jeff. I think it is a positive.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
What is happening?
You got a timestamp.
I know. I agree. And I think that it's an indicator of better checks and balances, and potentially too, to your point, David, we're seeing the headcount go up at some of these agencies. So FDA has more people now, NHTSA has more people now, NTSB has more people now. So you're seeing maybe a little bit more scrutiny coming from the federal level, and just more eyeballs on the problems. And I agree. I don't think it's that we're not doing as good of a job. It's just that more people are they've got their hawk eyes on this stuff and trying to make sure that safety problems aren't getting out into the market. So that's good for consumers.
It's good for consumers. And when you say regulation isn't good for business, like, I mean, when we're talking about pharmaceutical, medical device, food and beverage, I feel like we can all get on board that we want those to be safer.
Shouldn't have to think about it.
No. All right. Well, let's get on to our final thoughts before we get out of here this week. Anna, what is your final thought? Anything brewed throughout the last 90 minutes or so?
My daughter, who is 9, has started listening to her first podcast.
Oh man!
But it's not. I don't know if you'd call it that. It's the Arthur podcast. You guys familiar with Arthur? He's an aardvark.
There's an Arthur podcast?
Yeah.
Is it like a story?
Yeah.
Or is it like behind the scenes?
It's like behind the scenes. It's just like Arthur talking to DW about, like politics and things.
Okay.
No, it's a story. And so it's really, I don't know, maybe more of an audio book, but they call it the Arthur podcast. So she's like into podcasts.
Okay.
So if anyone, first of all, if anyone has any tips on like good podcasts for, school age kids, I would love to know, because I think she thinks it's cool. But secondly, what age do you think you start listening to the Today in Manufacturing podcast?
Well, 5 and 3. That's when I forced mine to. No.
And they just like stare off into space and listen?
No, remember they're actually quite critical. Remember, the first time Des watched the podcast, his immediate feedback was, "You need to let Jeff and Anna finish their thoughts before you talk, Dad." I'm just like,
thanks,
that's
Des.
a fair point. That's a fair point.
I knew he'd have my back.
I like to think of the Today in Manufacturing podcast as like a STEM educational tool. So I think introduction to it around like middle school, early high school, that makes sense. That makes sense as part of a curriculum.
All right, so a couple of years.
Yeah.
I'll give her a break for now.
Oh, okay. I mean, she hasn't just like accidentally seen it in the background or anything?
I mean, she's seen like some of the videos that we do for work.
Well, do you remember she did make a guest appearance? I think on one of the episodes we had to do from home. We had like an outbreak in the office.
She's already been on it.
Yeah, that's true. She would love to be on it, I bet. If we could bring her into the studio ever and she could just kind of stand here and like make weird noises into the mic. I'll see if she's interested.
Yeah, well, just we'll have her set up and like we can throw it to her just like, "Hey, what do you think?"
And just she'll be like, "What?
Yeah. What do you think about the uptick in recalls?" Just
I actually had my daughters convinced to come in and do a segment because like they're in that when we talk about targeting, trying to get women in manufacturing and STEM and all that kind of stuff, to have them come in for a segment. And that was right when they went back to school, after the COVID stuff. So after that, it sort of lost any opportunity there. But
it was over.
Almost had him.
And Anna, I do like the idea of like a real deep dive Arthur podcast where he like gets into the nuances of government.
Yeah. We went down a rabbit hole, she and I, recently looking up on Wikipedia what actual animals all the characters are in Arthur.
Oh, okay.
And there's some weird stuff. Did you know that Binky Barnes is a bulldog?
I don't know anything about Arthur.
Oh.
I never did Arthur when I was younger, and my kids aren't into it yet. But
I loved Arthur, and I could not get the girls to watch it long enough.
Oh, really?
They switched off of that kind of early.
No, we're deep into Super Y right now.
Oof, sorry.
No, it's one of those where at first I'm like, what are we doing to ourselves? And now I'm into it.
It's a lot of learning. The theme song is what gets me.
It is.
It's in my head now. Thanks.
Stuck in your head. My final thought is just about another reminder to kind of really vet the purchases that you make online. I recently
here we go.
No, I was on Amazon and I was trying to buy snacks because you kind of turned me on to like sometimes when you shop on Amazon you can get like a pretty good deal on snack food, particularly like healthier snack items, right?
True.
And so I was one thing that I kind of enjoy doing every once in a while is I love like sending these giant snack boxes to friends and family without them knowing about it.
Oh, okay.
And so like I looked at it once and I was just like, and so I went and I looked at it and I'm like, you know what? That is a great deal. I get like 60, 80 snacks for like $20. I'm a fool not to bring this into my own house. So I finally buy one, right? Buy it on Amazon. It's great. It comes to the house. Half of them are like broken and smashed. The other is like there are 8 different granola bars. All of them have been recalled. And I was just like,
What?
Some of the bags were torn open, and I was just like, so I emailed them. I was just like, because they sent me one of those like canned emails that you get that's like, hey, we really appreciate it if you could leave a review. And I just replied, I'm pretty sure you don't want me to. And I started with like, I sent them pictures. I took pictures of everything. It was like a bag of veggie straws that had been like sliced open. I'm like, what about this? And they're like, we'll give you a $10 gift card. And then I kept looking, and all the like fiber bars were smashed beyond recognition. And then
That's concerning.
Yeah, and then as I put it into the our like snack basket, I like kept finding recalled Quaker brand granola bars that had been recalled. And so I was finally just like, listen, I just need my money back. And to their credit, they did refund me minus like some sort of like the equivalent of a restocking fee, which was, the shipping cost or something. And it just, it was a good reminder of when you buy things online, particularly, like food items, you can't kind of vet them. It's kind of like, well, people say like kind of beware with like shopping online or like Instacart, because you're not the one picking the produce. Mm-hmm. Whereas, these are snacks that I clearly would have never put in my cart. And would have been a red flag that they were flat or open. And so sometimes you just got to be a little bit more careful of your online purchases.
You know what I think we need is just like there's a Consumer Reports or Good Housekeeping seal or whatever. We need a David Manty sticker, like when it comes to home improvement service providers.
Just don't
Amazon
use
purchases.
anything David has done.
Just so you know.
Yeah.
David Manty used this service or product.
It's got to be bad.
So
just warning you.
It's a nightmare.
I definitely was not buying any of that stuff. I feel like you took my advice and went in a wrong direction with it.
Well, no.
I meant like you could buy like little packets of goldfish for your kids' lunch, and that's all I meant.
Well, what do you mean? It was like, it's just a giant box of snacks. You wouldn't buy
what
that?
could possibly go wrong?
I don't know.
Come on! You only know something went wrong because I said it. Like, it's a good deal on name brand snacks and other things.
Didn't sound like a good deal.
Yeah. And then so it actually opened my eyes to how many gift baskets had actually been recalled, because you never think about how all of this stuff is purchased and put into gift baskets.
Oh, how it's just dispersed and then, yeah.
Yeah, and so because I was looking for some sort of alert or release on this, and yeah, apparently it just kind of opened my eyes a little bit to how far-reaching some of these recalls really go.
How many pounds of Bit of Honey and Brock's candy was included in that? Or some sort of jelly something.
These are all gross.
Those are things you order.
No. Only because they're funny, not because I actually want to consume them.
Oh, okay.
No, this was like...
Every year, it's
Sure.
funny.
No, I can't. I've been shamed into buying better quality candy now. I've been candy shamed. The Bracks and the Werthers are just for me, not Bit of Honey. My God, I'm not a monster. Jeff, what is your final thought this week?
I had a pretty chill week. There was a lot popping up that would give me a real great closing thought this week, unfortunately. So all I'm going to say is the same thing I say to my kids whenever they leave. Be smart, have fun.
Aw, that's nice, Dad.
Yeah, I like to keep it simple sometimes. All right, well, before we get out of here, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. You could also help us out a lot by leaving the podcast a positive review on whatever platform you use. If you want to email the podcast, you can reach any of us at Anna, David, or Jeff at IN.com with email the podcast in the subject line. You can also subscribe to our daily newsletter. Make sure you get it delivered to your inbox first, or subscribe to us on YouTube at IN Magazine so you can join us live every Thursday at 2 p.m. so you can help mix it up with the John and Doug and Seth and Jesse and everyone that joins us live every Thursday. All right, for Jeff Franke and Anna Wells, I'm David Manty. This is the Today in Manufacturing podcast, and we'll see you next week.